Start. One of the questions involved in the case is whether the judiciary can exercise the executive power of directing the police force of another state to carry out investigations without the consent of the state, and can the doctrine of separation of powers curtail the power of judicial review. The court once again used its trump card of judicial review and held that the exercise of the power of judicial review by the High Court would not amount to an infringement of the separation of powers principle. Para. The trump card has been correctly used here as judicial review can be seen as an exception to the separation of powers principle. The court examined that in the modern times, this doctrine no longer restricts itself to a rigid separation of powers between the three organs. It ensures a limit on active jurisdiction of each organ, check and balance over the activities of other organs, and is also meant to check government inaction. According to retired Supreme Court Judge Rumapal, the Constitution allows for parallelism of power with hierarchies between the three organs in particular fields, which must be maintained and balanced by each organ subject to checks by the other two. Where there is inaction by the executive for whatever reason, in exercise of its constitutional obligations, the judiciary can provide a solution till such time as the legislature or the executive act to perform their roles. The judiciary has not only issued directions to the executive to perform its functions but has also exercised executive power often, an example being the judiciary's active role in environmental matters. Hence, the judgment of the court is in tune with the constitutional interpretation and modern understanding of separation of powers doctrine. Para. The judgment may raise concerns about the limits of the power of the High Courts to give directions to CBI and about the flooding of courts and CBI from cases seeking investigation by the CBI. Realizing this, the court cautioned that this power should be exercised sparingly within double court where it becomes necessary to provide credibility and instill confidence in investigations, or where the incident may have national and international ramifications, or where such an order may be necessary for doing complete justice and enforcing the fundamental rights. Quotation close. It has been alleged that this disclaimer has been couched in too wide terms to be of any purpose. However, where an individual is in principle or by right entitled to relief, it would be wrong for the judiciary to deny relief on such grounds of policy like preventing excessive litigation. Hence, the Supreme Court's approach rightly allows the courts from granting relief where a right has been violated, while also expecting some extent of self-discipline from them. Para. There is no doubt that judicial review is one of the most important aspects of the Indian Constitution and must be actively used by courts to ensure the protection of the rights of the people. However, the courts should not rely only on the principle of judicial review to trump any argument that may be presented before it. In this case, the court emphasized and relied a little too much on the concept of judicial review in order to justify its powers of giving directions to the CBI. For example, it quoted the opinion of Y.K. Sabarwal, C.J. expressed in Ayar Coelho versus State of Tamil Nadu, stating that within double court, courts may be forced to modify the principle of parliamentary sovereignty in cases where judicial review is sought to be abolished. Quotation close. The court also concluded that within double court, judicial review acts as the final arbiter not only to give effect to the distribution of legislative powers between the parliament and the state legislatures, it is also necessary to show any transgression by each entity. Quotation close. Such overemphasis on judicial review was not only unnecessary in the circumstances of the case, but may also invite criticisms of overactivism by giving an implication of usurpation of powers and self-declared supremacy over the other organs. Para. The application of the basic structure doctrine by the court without adequate debate on the established jurisprudence on the same, and declaring the law through various propositions mentioned only in the conclusion without backing them with any reasoning in the main judgment, can have far-reaching implications. With due respect to the Supreme Court, it is submitted that the court should have rather addressed the arguments directly, seeking answers from within the framework of the Constitution and its provisions. On the contrary, while the court discussed celebrated doctrines of judicial review, basic structure, independence of judiciary, the expanding scope of Article 21, etc., it barely touched upon how the right of a victim to a fair investigation falls within Article 21 and mentioned it only in the conclusion. The court declared that the High Court's direction under Article 226 is valid even without examining whether this right had actually been violated in the present facts. Para. Even though the final decision of the court is correct, the flawed reasoning poses various questions which are not merely academic in nature but can have serious practical implications. A higher reliance on legal and constitutional provisions than on broad doctrines to reach the same conclusion might have resulted in greater acceptance of the judgment. Stop.